I'm here with one of the world's leading spring kayakers. Up until 2018, he was competing at the very highest level. And it's more than a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with Steve Bird, who originally was from South Africa and at the age of 19 emigrated to Perth, Australia, where he further developed and honed his kayaking skills to become, as I say, one of the very best in the sport. He was a five-time national champion in men's double kayak, a five-time Australian national champion in men's single kayak. He competed in both the 2012 and 2016 Summer Olympic Games, where in the Summer Olympic Games in Rio, in the K1 event, he placed 8th. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak, Steve.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can start just by talking a little bit about how you got into kayak and what was appealing about it.
My older brother, he's 8 years older than me. He got into it at school in South Africa. Kayaking or canoeing, they call it over there, is offered as a school sport. And he took it up, and basically our family ended up following him around doing races all around South Africa. So after a couple of seasons, my folks kind of offered the opportunity. They bought me my first kayak when I was 7 years old, and that's kind of how I got into it. I basically just wanted to do what my brother did. And it also fitted quite well with my distaste for cricket, because that was another summer sport that, while I was pretty good at cricket, fielding on the boundary all day in the heat didn't really appeal to me. So being in the water and amongst the action was pretty amazing. I basically got into it via my brother finding the sport.
I guess it's kind of like Vegemite, a bit of an acquired taste. I hope I'm not offending any cricketers when I say that. But what was it that once you started getting into the sport, what was it that you found interesting or enjoyable about it?
I think that every kind of decision you make within it is up to you. You're responsible for the lines that you take down the river, down the rapids. You have that autonomy to choose and be tactical in your decisions within the racing. I enjoyed the diversity as in the sport, where when I was growing up and in my adolescence, I did probably 6 or 7 different domains of paddling, from canoe polo to slalom kayak, which is one of the Olympic disciplines, sprint kayak, flat water marathon, downriver marathon, downriver whitewater sprinting. They're all like different domains, and ocean ski paddling. So I love the diversity within the sport. That was something that was appealing. But I think one of the big things was which is still something for me now, is being able to get onto the water. I've always viewed getting onto the water as neutral ground. No one owns anything out on the water. It's not a country. It's neutral, and you can go onto the water and work hard, feel the boat run, and leave all your kind of things on the bank. Mm-hmm. And then just for a portion of time, it's kind of therapeutic from that point of view. And that's another element of the sport that I like, is that you really do get away from from things. You can look, like when I'm out on the water and I look on the bank, you're kind of looking back and you're looking at like another life almost. It's weird.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a part of the sport that really appeals to me. And then I think the travel that comes along with it is amazing. Like going around South Africa, I've seen all corners of South Africa, just going and doing races and things like that. Not so much in Australia. Australia is so big, but certainly internationally, pursuing sport, paddle domains where you can compete for your country. The travel has been something that's been really appealing for the sport. And I guess in describing earlier that sense of kind of ruggedness and adventure that comes with getting in a boat by yourself and paddling down a valley of rapids, attracts a certain type of person, I guess.
Yeah.
And being around those type of people was something about the sport, that was attractive too. There was that story afterwards. There was just a lot of storytelling, and I love to be part of that narrative.
Yeah, it sounds very social, even though, you're competing, I guess, in doubles, but also in many single events. Sounds like with the stories that there's a strong kind of socializing component to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most sports people gather, afterwards or things like that. But yeah, there is a social side to it. When paddling in a team boat, we call it team boat. It's like a K2 or a K4. Kayak 2, kayak 4, 4 people in a boat. That's another dynamic altogether. You're really trying to maximize that boat speed via cohesion and working together. There's an accountability factor there with your team. Like, for example, my doubles partner that I went to London with, we lived together in a share house for 4 years before the London games. And we were two guys that are really actually quite disorganized and quite laissez-faire. And we had good cohesion, and we had talent, and we had a potential good prospect, but we needed to kind of rein it in and become more organized so that we could reproduce a good performance consistently all the time.
Yeah.
And therefore, living together, we were able to keep each other accountable on diet, hours of sleep, things like that. So the team element to the sport, there's an attraction to that side too. So while I am attracted to being isolated on the water by myself with time and space, sometimes I come up with my best thoughts, and when I'm on the water, just with the time to think, openly with clarity. But then, with a team situation, that's a whole different dynamic too, the way that you impact your partner. And certainly when I came from South Africa, very conservative society, and met Jesse Phillips, my doubles partner. He was at 12 years old, he had his bicycle and he was just everywhere around Perth, meeting girls, and he was just a very independent guy from a young age, whereas I was the complete opposite. And the way that we came together was pretty funny, and the dynamic. He really taught me how to believe in myself, because I wasn't one. I would always kind of shy away from a comment such as, when London was 2012, and like it would be 2009, and he would start referring to, well, in London, it's going to be like this. And, you know, on the start line at the games, it's going to be like that. And I'm more, well, mate, like we've got that many hoops to jump through before we even get a look in. We don't even know if we've got what it takes. Like I'm more of that type of person where he's just a downright, we can do this.
Yeah. So
we can.
he was planting a lot of seeds, it sounds like, and had a lot of faith in his ability and presumably yours as a team.
Yeah, he did. And that was something that was, from a growth point of view for me, was amazing too. So the sport has that element to it as well, where you grow individually when you're on your own out there, when you kind of in your thoughts and have clarity, but then, you know, paddling in a kayak with someone where, you know, you're trying to induce that whole 1 + 1 = 3. You know, you're trying to make the sum of your parts produce a product, a result that you know you wouldn't be capable of producing if you were on your own. Because often for us, like in that year at the qualifying for London, and actually the years 2009, 10, and 11, we would never ever make the final at nationals in our singles. But then when we got in the double, we would win. So that was very difficult for like the selectors and the coaches to kind of get their heads around, because they would put, you know, first and second in the single together and then race against us and we'd beat them. And then they'd put first and third together, right, and then second and fourth, and then eighth and second. And every time we would win. It was the weirdest thing. And so we had to actually race a lot because the selectors were very skeptical of what was going on, because but the way that we worked together in the boat, the way that we turned over every stone, once we got our shit together, so to speak, and actually started to premeditate our performance through good process and routine and stuff like that, we started to rely on that rather than our kind of, I guess, flippant, wild characters, or yeah, I don't know if that's the way to describe us at the time, but certainly we were able to perform much better in the double, and making that boat go was so rewarding, and sharing it with someone. So yeah, the sport, what I like about it, to return to your question, that's, you know, there's, I guess that's polarizing, you know, the isolation of being on your own, but then also the feeling of being in a team where that boat finishes across that line, that bow of that boat, there's two people in it, you're very close to each other. So that's really fun too.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, Steve, like the sport offers you so many different things, whether it's the synergy that you allude to of working together with Jesse, and kind of that adage that the sum is greater than its individual parts. Sounds like it was the case with the two of you and how you work together. Or, you know, you mentioned the fact that the water was therapeutic and you could clear your mind, or, you know, all these different events. And I imagine maybe that different skill sets might be used in different events, or the social element. It sounds like kayak offered you a lot in terms of your life and I guess reaching many goals. But I want to touch on that point you mentioned about risk, or you allude to this idea of risk. I think when you talk about flowing down a rapid river, and I imagine that kayaking does have a strong element of risk. So maybe you can speak further to that point.
Yeah, I guess the level of risk looks different in different domains of the sport. Like if you're in the ocean and you're doing an open ocean paddle, like a channel crossing, for example, like we've got Rottnest Island just off the coast here. It's 20 k's off, and we often do a paddle from there back to the mainland with the prevailing southwester. But you know, I guess the immediate risk there is if you fall off your ski and it blows away from you, because these skis are really, really, really light, and in this really strong wind, if you don't have a leash attached to you and to your ski, or if that leash snaps, your boat just goes. And then, you know, you need your flare and your life jacket and your, you know, sometimes you take your mobile phone with you. I don't know. Those are some of the risks, like in paddling in the open ocean. Injury wise in the ocean, obviously you've got moving water. Your body neurally needs to adapt to maybe different conditions and different directions of wind and chop and stuff like that. Down the river, certainly more risk of drowning down rivers when water's moving through rocks, essentially, which creates rapids. That movement of water can really put you in dangerous spots if you don't kind of get your body into the right, or pick the right line. I think I've snapped 3 or 4 boats in half around rocks and bridge pillars and stuff like that because I've just chosen the wrong line and I haven't had enough speed, and the current's pulled my tail around, and all of a sudden the current takes you sideways down the river and you wrap around a bridge pillar. Fortunately, each time, you know, I've been able to get out and swim to the side, but often people get stuck in their kayak. Even simply, if you fall out your kayak down a rapid and you try and stand up in the rapid, your foot can get entrapped, you know, under a rock or a branch or something. The current basically pushes your whole body over under the water. And you get pinned basically to the bottom. You might snap your ankle at the same time, but people have died. It's just the most common cause of drowning on a river is people standing up. You know, the way that they teach you in you know, whitewater rafting or stuff or things like that is to keep your feet up and float down the rapid. Don't ever stand up in the rapid. So those are a few little things. Sprint kayaking, the kayaking that I went to the Olympics for, like the risk of injury or death, very, very minimal. But is that, in terms of risk, are those the immediate ones that you are asking about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And, you know, I guess I'm curious kind of psychologically how you manage the risk, like, you know, if there's concern about drowning or the boat breaking if you choose the wrong line, or, you know, rocks, or all these variables, I imagine that, you know, impact not only your performance, but your safety. How do you manage those risks from a psychological standpoint?
That's a good question. I mean, I've always lent into that contest, you know. I mean, the other thing with open ocean paddling is, especially in WA, is sharks. You know, big sharks. You know, we've got we have had the highest rate of shark attacks in the world for a while now, and like autumn now is the time when they, you know, the salmon are running and there's a lot of sharks in the ocean. And I've had this conversation with someone the other day. I'd never ever think of sharks when I'm in the ocean, but then other people, it's the only thing on their mind, you know. So I know that maybe there's just a natural way of ignorance, perhaps, but I kind of see those challenges as an opportunity to challenge myself, where that risk, you know, behind that risk, there's the choice making process. And I guess that excites me, where I need to make a decision
Right.
to I need to make a decision, the right decision that's going to mitigate as much risk as possible. So I'm more interested in that than the outcome of, what is the outcome of a bad decision? What's the worst that can happen? That's a good question. I enter this race. The rapids are known to be really challenging, or the distance of this race is known to be really challenging. But what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Are there things in the worst that can happen in the river? Yeah, you could drown. Why? Because you stood up in the rapid, and because those are, I know the common forms of drowning in a river. So what are the steps you take to not kind of doing that? So
Right.
I know those steps really well. So knowing what I need to do if I get into a risky situation is probably how I cope with it. What are the techniques that you need to know that are going to help you here? It's actually very. I had this conversation with a young athlete, because my job at the moment is as the director of surf sports at my local surf lifesaving club. And a lot of those young athletes, when you're racing through the surf, so surf lifesaving competition is basically racing in and out of the break zone in surf beaches. So there's a level of danger there. There have been fatalities where people have been hit on the head by a craft. They've been knocked unconscious, sunk to the bottom and drowned. Others have had really gnarly, board to their head, have had to have plastic surgery to, it's a rough sport like that. It's a sport where you have to adapt a lot of the time. But I always say to the kids, like, we've got techniques and things in place for you to give yourself the best chance at that not happening. And when you know these really well, I can tell you now, like, you got more chance of being knocked over by a car than risking something in the surf. So
Right.
I try and instill the same thing in them and say, well, if a big wave's coming and it's broken at this point, this is what you need to do. And it's my job to equip you with the tools to cope with that risk.
Yeah. So it sounds like you work through potential scenarios, and as you say, like, those are well trained, or kind of you learn how to deal with those situations so that it's pretty ingrained. Would that be
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah. I'd say my thinking in the way that I perceive sports in terms of energy given to that risk conversation is more laden in the risk of losing.
Right.
That's the whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of my energy, perhaps negative energy, is what was spent because I still compete. What are the risks surrounding that for you? And that's always been. I've always been I handle losing a lot better now. But growing up, I couldn't emotionally handle losing, and I would obviously project that, and it would express itself, in the moment. But better at doing that, but certainly the risk. And that's why I asked, when you asked me about risk, are you talking about the immediate risk of the actual discipline, or is it more global, as in the risk of participating in an amateur sport that's not paid at all until you're 32 years old? And then, here I am still studying my undergrad in psychology at 32. But, I went to 2 Olympic Games. Those are, risks that are more present in the way that I think. The immediate risks aren't so big for me,
Right.
but
And I
it's more.
guess
Yeah.
in terms of those immediate risks, Steve, you mentioned that when you're in the open water in the ocean, you're not even thinking about sharks, for example. Is that because you're just immersed in the task at hand and you're focused on, the actions that you need to be doing, or kind of the competition, and is that why kind of the immediate risk or danger doesn't enter into your mind, or is there some other factors at play there?
Yeah, that's a great way of summing it up. Yeah, I'm just focused on what I'm doing in the ocean. If it's flat in the ocean, I am focusing on the session. I'm focusing on how my technique feels. I'm focusing on my management of the stress in the session, breathing, and then if it's rough and you're catching runs and waves, that's all I'm focused on. So sharks don't really come into the equation. Perhaps swimming in the ocean is more. There's more awareness of fauna,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. I'm really engrossed in the task.
Right. Have you experienced any injuries in the course of your kayaking career?
Yes. So not from kayaking, but I played rugby till I was about 15 years old. And yeah, I sustained an elbow injury, a bone injury on my radial head in my elbow, and my right elbow, playing a rugby match, which took me out of the kayak for about 6 months, but I was only about 12 years old at the time. So that's been something that's, at the time it was really there, and then the recovery of that is a little bit vague for me,
Sure.
the memory of recovering from it. But yeah, coming back into sport from there was, it's just been there all the time.
Yeah. In what way or how?
Different levels of pain, different various elements of the sport. So, for example, in sprint kayaking, you start stationary and ready, set, go, and to get your boat up to speed takes a lot of grunt and a lot of power. And often in those sessions where we would do, 20 to 30 starts, it would flare up. So it would be more painful in those situations. It would be more painful when I did pushing exercises, so bench press, push-ups. I mean, this was only established kind of later on when I had to learn how to manage it, because when I was younger and I was living with it, it seemed all right. I think obviously when you're younger, your body's bounces back a little bit more. But as I got older and as the nature of the sport changed, as in my distance that I raced at the Olympics was 200 meters. And that's just a flat out sprint. The start means a lot. But the 200 meters wasn't always in the program. It only came into the program in 2012. So the 2012 was the first time that the 200 meter was raced. Prior to that, it was the 500 meter and the 1,000 meter. And then they took out the 500 meter. And so then you had the 200 or the 1,000. So those are the two distances.
Yeah.
And as that came in, then obviously our training changed. We did more starts, and gradually the elbow just went, you're going to have, basically you need to adapt, you need to change. Otherwise, basically, I'm not going to survive here.
Mm-hmm. Did that put a lot of pressure? Like I imagine a sprint event would be quite anaerobic. Is that correct?
Yeah, alactic. a little bit of anaerobic towards the end, but mostly the sprinting side of it is a neural fatigue, which is hard to measure. You know, aerobic fatigue is like, you know, there's a lot of literature in place surrounding the measurement of that fatigue through heart rate and heart rate variability and things like that. Like, but neural fatigue, you know, we messed around a little bit towards the end there with cortisol levels, but when you're not firing and that spark just gets suppressed start after start, that's a difficult fatigue to measure.
Yeah. Did those starts put a lot of pressure on your elbow?
Yeah. So when you start, I mean, people start on different sides of the boat, as in your left stroke or your right stroke. But I started on my left, which meant that my top right hand was the one that was digging down, putting pressure down into the blade, and that was essentially a pushing movement. And slowly, I actually adapted my starting technique so that I wouldn't hurt my elbow so much. And in the end, I adapted everything. I didn't do any pushing exercises that would aggravate it. The cost benefit, you know, like, it wasn't worth me pissing the joint off to get the gain, because bench press and push-ups, obviously that's growing your chest, which you need chest in kayaking, but it wasn't worth it. So yeah, I actually ended up adapting a lot.
Right. I was just going to say, it sounds like you had to make modifications and changes in order to avoid exacerbating that pain or further injury to the site.
Yes, definitely.
And would you say, I guess, was that helpful to you in sort of learning to listen to your body, or to kind of have signs about when to back off, or what things you could and couldn't do in terms of your training?
I mean, the knowledge about the injury, for sure. Knowledge about my body, that probably only came later on, when after the London Olympics I had surgery on it.
Mm-hmm.
Where I learned a lot mentally, physically about the nature of injuries. But yeah, probably at the time when I mean, obviously you go through these things at different stages, and when I was just managing it and it was fine and it was bearable, and I'd go, that wasn't good for it, don't do that again. Yeah, that's learning about the injury. So that aggravates it, don't do that. When I had surgery, that's when I really learned about the power of injury. Mm-hmm. And that's how I termed it, because, you know, obviously you can get a little bit down because of an injury, but gradually I was able to turn it around and actually use it to my advantage.
Okay. Yeah, power in what way?
Well, it was, you know, there were parts of my body that there were weaknesses, you know, there were discrepancies, and I was forced out of the kayak, forced out of my usual routine, and basically in the off season where you would be doing this, and you had been doing it for 4 off seasons before, you now had to completely change. And so I did a lot of bike riding, you know, watt bike sessions on the stationary bike, lots of leg gym, lots of hip work. I exercised my like my uninjured arm and things like that, but found ways to keep fit, keep strong, and almost detrain the movement, the kayaking movement, being forced out of the boat, which is actually the case for a lot of Northern Hemisphere athletes, where in the winter you can't train, Canadians and stuff like that. So you find alternative ways to exercise, and in doing so, you move away from the neural pattern of paddling, and often the forgetting and the detraining of that technique. A lot of feedback that you hear from athletes that had bad habits, technical habits before the off season, they go through the off season, they get on the water at the end when it's warmer, and the coach goes, wow, like it's gone, like that what I was trying to get you to do. So it's almost like the hardwiring, you take it apart through detraining, and when you return, you're better technically, because your body has repatterned, has had an opportunity to kind of almost be wiped clean. So when I spent that off season just gymming, doing a little bit of rehab on the elbow from the surgery, but really strengthening my glutes and my hips and my hamstrings and things like that. So I mentioned to you before, I don't know, before we started recording or not, but we, correct me if I'm wrong, if we have talked about this during recording, about the sum of our parts in the double, and the K1 in the single not making the final. So from not making the final at nationals, so I had this surgery in the October, that the games were in the London games in August, so September, October, had the surgery. I got on the water, so October, November, right at the end of December, I started to get on the water and do some 4 kilometer, just really just easy paddling, hardly any, just every second day. By the end of January, I was doing, longer, 8 to 12 kilometer, just actually starting to actually get up to that anaerobic phase. By the middle of February, I was starting to get up into sprinting zones. And then, because that next season after that, they pushed trials to, I think it was, they had the nationals in March. Yeah. And by the middle of March, got on the water at nationals, kind of like, let's just see what happens, and won. So that was like from being third in the B final, so 12th in the country, to being first in the country, having done the preparation that is not ideal, right? Yeah. But when I reflect on that, I go, okay, well, what were the ingredients to that? It's got to be stimulus change, giving your body something new to deal with. And that's, I guess, the power of the injury. Can you turn your injury into an advantage via viewing it as an opportunity to detrain some of the bad habits that you've got? Give those muscles a rest and allow your mind to go, okay, well, just do your best. Just see what you can do, mate. That's a different mentality as well. But certainly I got into the boat and my hips were so strong and my core was so strong. I realized, that I really needed that time out of the boat to address these things. And it almost happened inadvertently, I just didn't realize how weak I was in those areas. And getting back in the boat, coach was like looking great. Like, your techniques never look better.
Yeah.
In fact, you've improved. And I'm going, okay, well, wow, this, you know, the power of forced time out of the boat, you know, can actually be pretty powerful if you allow it to be. But obviously, there's obviously sometimes that mental burden or block that I'm injured, it's over, I can't do this. I don't know at the time, if we look at the timeline of when the surgery happened, you know, it was after the Olympic Games. I had achieved a life goal that I'd always wanted to achieve. So maybe it was, mate, you know, you've done it. I mean, we were 6th place in London, which was, it far exceeded, you know, we came into London ranked about 16th. So made up, you know, 10 spots. And so I was very content. So it was almost like, cool, let's have the surgery. Yeah.
So it was
having
the
an
timing.
injury, the timing's really important, I think, it seems. Whereas if I was in that lead up to London and I needed my elbow and I was slightly, you know, when you're trying to turn over every rock and trying to arrive on the start line going, you know, I've done everything I can for this performance to be the best, all that psychological stuff, which is really powerful, which is what we needed, you know, to keep ourselves accountable. It's such an intense frame of mind that I couldn't, you know, I can't reflect on whether I've had an injury in that type of mindset,
right,
you know, at that time.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you know, I love how you express that, the power of the injury. It sounds like part of the power is not only that it gives you the chance to work on, you know, you said your glutes were stronger and you worked on all these different parts of your body that were maybe weaker before, but it also sounds like another component of the power of the injury was the fact that it enabled you to kind of take a perspective of like, well, there was no pressure. And it sounds like, again, maybe part of that ability to shift the mindset, let's, you know, take this as a chance to come back and see how it goes, was partly related, sounds like, to the fact that you had already accomplished, you said you placed 6th and you know, you were ranked 16th. And so I wonder, I guess my question is, I wonder if it would be possible to apply the same mindset that you had after you had the surgery and after the London Olympics. Let's play out a scenario where you had that same injury 3 or 4 months before the games, and there was kind of the time pressure, and you hadn't got the result yet. Do you think would it be possible to adopt that mindset that sounds like it was so helpful for you? Or would it be almost impossible because it's like, well, no, I've got the Olympic Games in 3 or 4 months, and like, could you kind of just release your mindset to be like, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like your mindset was part of the power of what made your comeback from the injury or the surgery specifically effective. And I guess I'm wondering, could you adopt that same mindset had you been under time constraints or pressures? It's hypothetical, you know.
Yeah, it's yeah. I have thought, you know, going through thinking, but when you sent, you know, the list of questions that you had, I did think about that, because I think timing is a really impactful variable in this conversation. So I think that, you know, it kind of lines back up with what type of person you are in terms of what gives you the confidence to race well. So if you're sitting on the start line and the thing that drives you is, I have killed myself in training, those sessions where I've, the intensity, if your confidence has a direct lineage back to high intensity and flogging yourself, if that's where your confidence is bred from, then I think that if I was to put that injury back into a stressful time, then sure, like that would definitely be a problem. A full faith in what I've got, making the most of what I got, and full faith in my performance regardless. I don't need those sessions to give me the confidence that I can perform.
Yeah.
Then that would be different. I'm trying to think about my reliance, what I rely on to give me confidence, but I think it would have been a lot more stressful. To answer your question, I don't know how I would have reacted, because what I learned in that injury, if it depends on if that was after what I learned about the injury after the surgery. So let's just say I took that into the Rio cycle and I was leading up to Rio and I got some kind of niggle injury. Having learned what I did after London, then I'd be fine. But if that was in the build up to London, at my age, at my maturity, 100% would have been different. I don't think.
Would it be fair, I guess, just to kind of reiterate and to sort of summarize your mindset after the surgery? I think you suggested that it was one of it didn't sound like there was a lot of pressure that you were placing on yourself, or it was kind of like there wasn't a lot of expectation placed upon yourself or what you might accomplish. And I'm wondering, I guess, if you were giving some advice to an injured athlete, would the take-home message be, well, even if you are under these time pressures, act as if you're not, or see if you can free yourself from that expectation and, adopt the mindset of, I'm going to do what I can and see how it goes. Mm-hmm. Is there merit to that thought? Or maybe I'm completely...
No. There is 100%. I think that use it to your advantage, because ultimately you are putting yourself in underdog status, and that's sometimes powerful. If you're putting yourself in that underdog position, I've seen people do PBs and they go, oh, I'm feeling a bit sick today, like I've had the flu and stuff. I had this bloke that I used to train with that he was very competitive and he was fighting for that Rio K1 spot, and he was one of those pretty fragile dudes that would be hot and cold within a session, and you'd be paddling out the back in the first couple of efforts, and then in the last couple of efforts you'd be right there at the front, and there'd be that real there'd be that real pressure within the training group, in that session, bit of friction and stuff. And mate, he used to always just be like, oh, I'm feeling this, I've got a really sore, and bit of kinesio rock tape on the shoulder, just to like prove to himself that, he's not a threat. Right. Because I guess that mindset of like knowing what you're capable of and knowing that you're a threat, some people just don't like that. Some people don't deal well with that. So it's almost like advice to someone else if they were in that stressful period is this is it. It's not going to change. But what you do have control over is the narrative that you would like to put to this situation. Mm-hmm. So how can we use it? What's the first step? Okay, well, enjoy it. Basically, the target's off your back. You've taken it off your back by showing everyone that you're sick, that you're injured, you got tape all over your body.
Right.
Cool. So no one thinks you're a threat. You don't think you're a threat, because when you think you're a threat, that's when that level of expectation goes up, and that's when you go, shit, I'm it, and that was, the whole narrative of, getting to the top is a lot easier than staying at the top. With those national championships, 5 of them in the K2, 5 of them in the K1, I built up to that. And I tell you, the journey getting there was a lot more enjoyable than trying to stay there, because you've got just people coming at you from all angles. So to almost know what you're capable of, but then take it down a level and go, well, this injury, I don't believe that I'm that capable of what I am. And therefore you kind of, you give yourself a bit of a break.
Yeah. So you're kind of giving like these handicap statements maybe to yourself or others, where in the event of poor performance, they're not necessarily going to infer that you're incompetent in some way or incapable.
Yeah.
And that in the process of doing that, it sort of lowers expectation. So are you suggesting that maybe in the case of injury, it's one way in which people can, if they're either making those statements to others or themselves, it's like, well, I was hurt, that it can help kind of alleviate some of that pressure or expectation, and maybe there's upside or benefit to that?
Yeah. I guess it just depends on where you sit in the pecking order as well.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, that's kind of a, because I always looked at that athlete and went, mate, you're such a cop out, but if you want to use that, use what you got, use whatever it takes to keep driving you. But reaction to stimulus change, reaction to events, like there's a decision that needs to be made, and the quicker it's made, the better it is, in my opinion, So as I said, for Rio, me and my doubles partner, we were going for that in the double. And 5 months before the trials, we got a phone call from the performance director saying, we're not taking the double. So for 2013, 14, 15, 3 years, we had been working as a team to try go to Rio in a double, and then we get told they're not going to take the double for 200 meters because they're prioritizing other events. So therefore, as I say, we had to get in our K1s and our singles and basically race against each other for the last spot on the Olympic team. So that was an interesting dynamic as well.
So that was, just to clarify, you're told what you had been preparing for, they're not going to be competing the doubles, and your partner then becomes the person that you're competing against to get the single spot in the singles event
that you're living with too. So it's so he's going for it, you're going for it, but the decision making is huge. So we were on that call together, and afterwards we got together again and went, far out, like, this is crazy. We're a team and these are our values. This is what we stand for. And basically we've been told that it's just not going to happen. But, I moped around for a day or two, but our reactions were quite polarized. I just got really dogged and just went, right, this is crap, I know, but here's what you're going to do. Here's the plan. This is how you're going to do it. And use that stimulus. I mean, you can have stimulus change in lots of different ways, right? Like in a physically within a program, you change the stimulus, you change your gym cycle every 4 weeks and your body grows and stuff like that. But for me, it was, okay, well, that's for your body. How about this stimulus change for your mind? Like, this is just being thrown in your face. It's like water being thrown in your face, and initially it's wow, and then you wipe it away, and you see the world with a different filter on now. And how can you use that change to drive the plan moving forward? So with an injury, it's like, this is a new stimulus. This was your plan. Your plan's taken a sidestep. What are you going to do? And I was very, like, the way that I approached training every day was so intense. I just wanted to absolutely obliterate and demoralize my competition within my training squad, who were all going for that one spot. Every session, if it was measured and if we were in the gym, I just wanted to wipe everyone off the floor, off the water. We would get sent data on like a Dropbox folder where you could see everyone else's data. I'd make sure that when people went into my data, which they always do, other athletes, they saw that they were being beaten by half a second over a 50-meter sprint. I wanted them to know that they stood no chance.
You don't sound very competitive, Steve.
I just went into this, and I mean that was a phase. That was just a phase, because it's unsustainable. It's so tiring. Like, there was something after Rio that I was just like, oh, I'm exhausted from bringing that to training every day. But I knew that I had just that period. I needed to be intense like that, and I used that stimulus to fuel that plan.
Right.
Jesse, my partner, he went literally the opposite way. So he spent weeks just in a really low state. I mean, he was, and I didn't know this at the time, but he was actually consulting with a lawyer for the situation that might arise where he had the right to appeal at the trials. So we would race the K2 at the trials, and if we won it, then he would have the grounds to appeal. And so he was consulting a lawyer the whole time. I only found this out afterwards. So while I was just getting the work done, positive, going for it, he was literally at the opposite end of the spectrum in a defeatist mind frame. And he's a fast paddler. Like, when he puts it together, we are toe to toe. But he constantly dragged himself down. And I felt like the stimulus was presented, mulled over it for a while. One went that way, one went that way.
So what, I'm curious about that, because, you talk about your reaction and your response to the stimulus, in this case, finding out that your event was no longer going to be one you could compete in, and how you said for a day or so you were kind of just down in the dumps, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but not too pleased about it. But then you kind of quickly channeled your focus to your training and your plan and what you were going to do. And so I guess what enabled you to make that shift? Is that a function of just your personality, or if other athletes listening to this were to take something away from it, what could they take that would help them maybe shift from that being, frustrated or distraught or whatever negative thoughts and emotions, to being able to shift their focus?
It sounds like super, I don't know what it sounds like, but I was doing a lot of reading at the time. And like, for me, I love to take what's going on in my current environment and what I'm exposed to through media or stories or, literature, and really take it on and use it. So I remember at the time, there was there's a big drug scandal at one of the AFL football clubs here, where, the players were doping, but the players were like, well, we didn't know we would we were just being told to take this by the coaches, whatever. Anyway, the coach got sacked, but the trial in court for the players continued. The new coach came in, and they were preparing for the next season. And then basically the court case, the conclusion, they concluded that the athletes were guilty, and basically this coach lost like 8 of his best players.
Mm-hmm.
And the AFL draft basically allowed him to draft 8 more people because he needed to fill that. And, that someone asked him in an interview, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do now? And, it's such simple stuff, like he just said, like, what can you do? This is this is what we've been told. We are at training on Monday morning and we will be going for it. You know what? You've got to stand up. You've got to stand up, Those were his exact words because I typed them down on my phone. Like I've got lists of stuff that really, resonates with me. At the time I was reading, and you may have read it, a lot of people have read it, Man's Search for Meaning by Nietzsche, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were going through, he was going through his experience in the concentration camps, and it sounds dramatic, but, he says in the book, everything can be taken from a man except for his ability to choose his attitude. And I was like, mate, you need to choose your attitude. Like, how are you going to deal with, like, are you going to let this have its way with you, or are you going to use it to, and that's why I talk about like the power of the injury, stimulus change in a physical sense. How powerful is stimulus change when you go into a new block of gym work and your body grows all of a sudden and you go, wow, okay, it's because your body's adapting. So how about we harness that power in this scenario and let's choose that attitude? And that was on like every decision that I would make towards sleep, towards eating the right food, towards training. So it was taking cues from the world around me, to answer your question way back, to turn it around. That was for me. I would take things from around me that would inspire me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But he also says in that book, if you have a decent why, then you can deal with almost any how. So, sitting down and going, okay, well, why is it worth going for this? And therefore, can you deal with how you're going to do it?
Okay.
So, there was things like that. Like I just took cues from my immediate environment, basically.
Yeah. So would you say it's important for injured athletes to choose their attitude or their response to how they react to the injury?
Big time.
Yeah.
There's that phase of decision making, and choose to view it as powerful rather than debilitating.
Mm-hmm. And in the process of making that choice, you just mentioned that distinction between why and how. So it sounds like, or would you say there's value in knowing why you're taking the path you are, or like what's driving you or motivating you to come back from an injury or to pursue, your singles event as opposed to the doubles? Is that kind of why factor important for injured performers?
Big time. I mean, why is it worth carrying on? Like before before the phone call, you were going, right? And now this happened. Okay, well then, you had heaps of why there. Now you got to create a new why. And the scenario, the situation at the time, I guess it's different for everyone, but I saw this as an opportunity to sit on the start line. And this is, I mean, maybe this is just comes with age and stuff, because what, at the time, 28, I don't even know if that's old enough for this type of thing, but, you know, I saw it as an opportunity to line up at the Olympic Games on my own, on like no one else around you. You're on the line. It's all you. You take responsibility for everything. You're not relying or having to keep anyone else accountable. You're keeping you accountable.
Yeah.
You know, so that was something that, you know, that's why I want to do this, because from a personal growth point of view, it's important that you go through this, in my opinion. So regardless of what happens, if someone beats you at the trial, then they have done a crap ton of good shit to beat you, because you've given it everything,
Yeah.
you know, mentally, physically.
Maybe you can talk a little bit, Steve, about kind of, you know, once you made that choice that you're going to pursue, you know, try to dominate training and pursue that spot, and maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of what unfolded prior to then making the team and going to the Olympics.
Yeah, as I said, like
how many months did you have, before, from when you found out, okay, we're just doing the K1, and then to the actual...
5 months.
Okay.
5 months. So my character is one where if I'm winning, it compounds. Like in the morning, we do a session, the data comes out, you know, I'm going, we've done standing 50-meter starts, and I am on average 0.4 of a second faster than everyone else. That's half a boat length. So even before we've got to when we at the quarter of the race, I've got half a boat length on my competition. That's huge, you know. So obviously planting that seed in their brains that they've got no chance somehow, and it sounds gross because I'm like not like that in terms of being so malicious with my intent, but at the time that would happen in the morning. We'd go to gym a couple of hours later, boom, like I'm better than you guys.
Yeah.
I'm better than you guys. Like I really fed off that, and that's my character. But some people, they don't give a shit about that. You know, like I know that Usain Bolt, you know, you read his books and he'd get flogged in training, but like he had that major backing, like of himself in the race situation. But in training, you know, he was quite a lazy trainer. Like he didn't give a crap. You know, what's his name? Johan Blake used to, you know, tail him up all the time in training. Yeah. But for me, that was something that compounded. I would, it was an interesting, I don't know if it's worth mentioning that in this through this cycle, I had a bit of a kind of turbulent relationship with the Institute of Sport, where I didn't believe that they were doing the best job in certain service provider areas. By the way, Pete was long gone by this time. Yeah. But I wanted more from the providers. I wanted more options. I saw that I had reached a ceiling. This was quite a while back. This is after London, and we were doing the same thing every year. And the only rise in performance that I got was, funnily enough, from the bloody injury and having that off season of doing different stuff. So to me, I'm going, you need to do different stuff. What's the solution here? And in 2015, we went, me and Jesse, my doubles partner, we went and trained with the British squad for 2 months. And the British, because we had befriended three of the guys on their team, and between three guys, the British 200-meter squad, so you got 200-meter singles and 200-meter doubles. So in London, they were first in the singles, third in the doubles, and then in Rio, they were first in the singles, second in the doubles, between three guys. So in our minds, and they weren't, Russian and Belarusian and dodgy or anything. So because, and we were like, we're good mates with them. Let's just flick them an email and just see if they'll have us for like 2 months. And we sent them an email, and because, they were a small squad, and they were really, like, their characters were pretty introverted and stuff. The Russian coach that they had was like, absolutely, come in, let's do this. And the squad became 5 guys. Anyway, they were just very open with what they were doing, from a programming point of view, from a daily training environment point of view. And we realized how many stones we weren't looking under, and they were basic stones too. They weren't little 1%ers. They were, in Perth, in Australia, there's such a tradition of training early in the morning, in the dark, in the cold, and in Australia, Australia-wide, for swimming and rowing and kayaking.
Yeah.
Europeans, mate, they don't touch anything before 8 a.m., so their training readiness is incredible. They have a good night's sleep. They wake up, they've been awake for 3.5 hours before training. It's light, it's warm, they've had some food, their body's starting to use that as fuel. So when we trained over there, it was 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the day. And they were dispersing the stress, the overall stress of the week across more sessions. We would do 2 sessions a day, and it would be stressful sessions. So it was very, sympathetic, parasympathetic, like there was no, so that was a real insightful thing. And at the time, like, we had secured some incredible sponsorship, which allowed us we didn't have to work, and we were earning some good money. So we went to the institute and went, well, we've learned this. We don't have to wake up at 4:30 for training because we got an income. How can we maximize this? Can we, we actually put a presentation for our support team. It was like, how are you going to do this in your home environment in summer when it's hot and when the southwest is blowing and this is and that's, and how do you know this is going to work for you? And we were like, we don't give a shit. We've reached a ceiling. We're not going faster. You don't have any solutions. We're doing this. Yeah. So that was the end of it. And basically the institute went, fine, off you go. You can maintain your scholarship here. Obviously that's in their best interest, because when you make the Olympic Games, obviously they
want you to go.
It's good for your numbers as an institute. So they kept us on board, but we had no facilitation of training. No one came and, like, every now and then the coach would pop in and stuff. But that was something, and I don't know if it's worth mentioning, as I said, in that moment, because we were doing I was doing something different to the squad. Yeah. And that feeling of branching off and being almost renegade-ish really drove me, taking my own path, taking ownership, responsibility, and not the institute trying to make me into a champion. I was making me into a champion. And I believed so strongly in these wholesale changes of when I trained in the day. and things like that. So from the time that news got announced, as you asked, to the trial, I was in that headspace of just like, you guys aren't doing what's required. If you guys beat me, I have failed. I've done something drastically wrong within the race.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have even a mediocre race, I'm going to beat you, you know?
Yeah.
And there would be times in between there that I would deliberately have a shitty start. I would have a slow start to induce what it's going to be like in the race if you fuck up your start. How's that going to be? You know? So in a time trial, we would all line up, you know, I think there was 8 or 9 of us in the squad, and I would go into race mode. 3 hours before, it was everything. Caffeine, all the ergogenic aids, all the everything like that. Chat to people. Like, I try and make the race the expression of my personality. So I don't like to just sit with headphones on and just psych myself up. I like to talk to people. So it would be chatting to the coaches, chatting to the other boys. Like, I'd do all my phases of preparation for the time trial. And then in this time trial, I would agree to myself, okay, cool. This is, you're gonna fuck up the start on this.
Mm-hmm.
So in the race, what happens if you mess up your start? I want to see what happens. Let's test this. And, you know, have it slip on my first couple of strokes and then go, okay, here we go. You fucked up the first 20 meters. So now you got 180 meters. What's going to happen? And I would just paddle through everyone and take out another 3/4 of a boat length. Mm. And I'd come away from that experience just like so fired up, so content and happy with my competency to survive if shit hit the fan.
Right. So you were intentionally putting yourself in challenging or less than ideal circumstances to test your ability to work through, and when you were able to do that, it sounds like it had a big benefit in terms of building your competence or your efficacy beliefs. And also, you mentioned that point about kind of when you decided, like, it sounded like there was some value in being able to take ownership or kind of determine the path that you were taking, because you felt like, okay, I've got this program, now I'm sort of steering the ship, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And again, sort of translating that, whether that's training or injury, is there benefit in particular, I guess, with maybe the uncertainties of the progression of return to sport from injury? Is there value in the injured athlete having that same mentality of kind of taking ownership or control of their path and their rehab program?
Hugely. Sorry, I'm just going to write something down here. Yeah. Sorry. So can you ask that question again?
Well, just about you're talking about when you adjusted your training and you had the program that you decided that was sort of like a rogue program. Is there benefit for the injured athlete to adopt a similar approach of you use the word ownership or taking control of their training, or in this case, their rehab program? Mm. Is there some value to that for the injured athlete?
Absolutely. Definitely. I think that, a lot of those things, choosing your attitude, that is ownership, making that choice. How are you going to react to this? That's taking ownership. relying on yourself. Learning to rely on yourself is hugely confidence boosting. And I think when you undertake these measures to get yourself back on track, you're having to strip everything back and take the time to sincerely address this injury, this issue, and that takes creative thinking. How can you induce the same stress that you put through your body in different ways? You're on your path on your own, and they're going to see when you come back. They'll see. Like, just wait for it, because you're making these decisions. So the answer, I think that ownership from an injury point of view, owning your injury maybe feeds into acknowledging the power of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't own it, I don't know what comes before first, but to really know the power of and the potential of injury, maybe ownership over it comes first. But being different, doing something different within such a regimented, institutionalized daily training environment, I found that refreshing, having been in it for so long. Being different, whereas for so long you're like, this is the herd, this is the program, I've got to do what the tribe does, I've got to, but there was something refreshing about, okay, well, you're going to have to do something different here, and you're going to have to drive your own ship. But one thing I will say that being injured allowed me to do was that autonomy away from the status quo, the program, is return to elements of my paddling that brought initial joy to the sport for me. So when I mentioned all those paddling domains, the experiences that I had and that autonomy to just go and train there and, go and exercise with that group. And whereas when you institutionalize, it's the same group all the time for 10 years. It's pretty hectic, So one of the most powerful things about it was actually returning to those scenarios that I drove myself. So when I was in South Africa, I went to boarding school for 7 years. And for the 5 years in high school, boarding school, it was the school that was about 45 minutes out of town. And it was on this estate, and it had a dam on it. And the dam was like 500 meters for a lap, really small dam. And I used to wake up, even in the middle of winter, it used to snow at school. It used to be really, really cold area of South Africa. And I'd wake up early, go down to the dam, and I'd do, an hour on the lake, just on my own, mist coming up, hearing my paddle in the water, feeling the boat run. And those are moments initially when I got into the sport that drove my love and passion for the sport. So the injury allowed me to go back and to explore those original moments, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I would go and I'd paddle at a time of day I wouldn't be paddling with the squad or anything. So I'd have, permission, if you like, because I was injured, to go and I'd go down south. Obviously you've been down south, Margaret River and stuff.
Beautiful.
And I'd find a piece of water and go for an easy paddle on my own, just in the elements. So being able to return to those things and step out of that like Olympic sport institution was so refreshing.
Yeah.
And I think that injury, that's another side of injury that is powerful because you're allowed to. And then when coming back into that fold again, I was just so keen because I'd filled my cup back up, you know?
Right. Well, yeah, I guess that's a good analogy, kind of filling your cup or your bucket by being able to return to those instances or those moments or experiences that gave you joy, love, pleasure, as you describe it. And also, I guess, sounds like, when you talk about the institutionalized kind of training, imagine is very routinized, regimented, and so you were able to explore maybe a little bit more variety or diversity, and sounds like
Absolutely.
you came back quite refreshed, it sounds.
Yeah. Well, that diversity, variety is probably great words to explain it. And you're talking about like institutionalized, as in like after every session, you're uploading your data to Training Peaks so the coach can see, so that it's like intensive, you know all about that type of thing. Sure. Being around, and you're like, wow, I'm a robot. I didn't start out being a robot. Now I'm a robot. So how about I go back to those times where it was just me and my paddle and my boat on a piece of water? Let's just strip it back, you know?
Right. Well, and you described that when I asked you when we first started chatting, just about kind of what drew you to the sport or what elements you found pleasure. And you talked about, you used the word therapeutic or just having clear thoughts being on the water. And it's also interesting because it sounds like, on the one hand, my impression is you're fairly data driven. Like when you talk about getting the numbers after the training and how you would see that you were maybe ahead of the competition, that was reinforcing. But by the same token, it sounds like the injury gave you a chance to kind of step away from that focus on the numbers and kind of the science of sport and return more to the, I don't know, just the art of it, or however one might express it.
The like the integrity of it, for sure. I think it's a bit of a tango maybe throughout your career where, as I say, the unsustainability of that intensity through the numbers, completely unsustainable. I knew that, but I knew that I had 5 months to be in that headspace. I was happy to be in that headspace. But yeah, certainly, there is a bit of a tango there. But yeah, I guess to summarize that a little bit, it's the power once again of isolation within your injury, because when you get injured, you can't be part of the herd in a lot of respects. Right. So don't feel vulnerable. Like, sure, there might be vulnerabilities in isolating yourself, but there's also a lot of cool stuff, that's in that isolation, perhaps.
Right. Well, and I think that's an interesting point, because commonly for injured athletes, there is that sense of isolation, and you seem to be suggesting to embrace it in some way, or, as you keep coming back to that term, to use it in a positive or adaptive or helpful way, rather than kind of just seeing the isolation as something that's a negative, or that you kind of need to return into the usual fold. And it sounds like you've managed to you sort of use that isolation in a positive way to find creative ways to enjoy being and practicing your sport.
Huge, yeah.
So it also sounds like, Steve, that you alluded to kind of support and having a support system in terms of your training. To our point also about isolation, maybe you can speak to the issue of, or is there benefit to social support for injured athletes?
I'm trying to think about during the time. Absolutely. I mean, I think isolation can be powerful, but if you're isolated to the point where no one cares, I think knowing that someone cares about your scenarios, having, someone else being compassionate towards what you're going through, absolutely is helpful. I mean, maybe that can be expressed in different ways. For example, like the institute pretty much paid for my whole surgery. That's an element of support that I felt a sense of support from them. Going, wow, they really do value me. They're paying for my surgery, which is expensive, because they acknowledge that, we're in this together type of thing. But certainly, it has to be. It wasn't something that I guess I felt like I necessarily needed at the time. Perhaps, I come from a very supportive family. Like, my parents are extremely supportive. My siblings, incredibly supportive. Like, I just knew that I'd be unconditionally supported no matter what happened. But perhaps for people that don't necessarily have that, they might seek that or find, wow, I don't feel supported at all in this. They've done nothing. But yeah, it's got to be good, right? Having that support.
Yeah. Are there, I imagine there's pain, certainly in terms of training, like, you've talked about or alluded to some of the physical demands of kayaking, and maybe you can talk about either the physical or psychological pain associated with injury, maybe that you experienced after your surgery, or maybe just more broadly.
Physical or mental pain?
Yeah.
While training, having physical, like this, just saying, like a start session, when I start, my elbow starts to get sore. It wasn't something that I could just work through. It's not something that in my head I went, okay, mate, it'll, just work through it. If it was sore, I'd just stop, and then the mental,
why wasn't it something you could or wanted to work through, or why was it best, or why did you decide just to stop?
Because of the way that I understood the injury, and because of my knowledge of what was to come in the day or the week. And was it worth it? Was it worth carrying on when you still got a session this afternoon, when you still got 3 more days in the week? Do you want to push through this and then not be able to paddle for 2 days? Or do you want to pull up, take what you have got? What did we get? Okay, well, we did 4 efforts instead of 6. Okay. How did I go? Cool, got that. But my understanding of the injury, it wasn't something like, oh, it's like a tendon that needs to warm up. It's a bone and it's pissed off.
Yeah.
So understanding of the injury, and then understanding, what was, and weighing it up in my head, basically. Because, it would mean, if pushing through would mean no training for a couple of days.
So would you say it's important for injured athletes to understand the nature of their pain?
Yeah.
Or their injury?
Hugely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone's got a different journey to go. Every injured person's got a different journey with being acquainted with that injury, building a relationship with it, and knowing when enough's enough. Definitely knowing about your injury is really, really helpful. And my knowledge for the injury grew as I got older, because when I was younger, I was like, my elbow hurts. take 6 months off. No worries. Cool. But as I got older, I was like much more receptive to experimenting. You become your own scientist, really, and you go, well, that hurt, not going to do that. That hurt, not going to do that. That was good. I'm going to carry on doing that. So
you had to really kind of observe and monitor what exacerbated maybe pain, or if you push through, kind of what led to maybe mistraining, and conversely what was helpful. So
big time. Yeah.
would you say then, again, I guess, that the understanding or distinguishing between benign or harmless pain versus more sinister or harmful pain is important for the injured performer?
Being able to differentiate.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd have sharp pains sometimes, and I'd go, well, the sharp pains are like, nah, that's just a no-go. I would have, I mean, another experimental thing. Sorry, yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, it is good. Benign versus direct pain. I think the more benign it feels, the more you can explore maybe just trying to push through a little bit more. But if it's sharp and it's something's wrong here, and the functionality, if you become dysfunctional in your movement, like if I wasn't able to actually execute the correct way to start and I looked at the video after that effort and went, mate, the fact that you can't apply top hand pressure because your elbow's sore means that you're falling off your stroke. Your boat's not getting off the line at all.
Yeah.
Pull the pin.
So that ability to kind of connect the pain to the functionality or loss of function in terms of the movement sounds like it's important for the athlete to consider.
Yeah, that's definitely a relationship to kind of to look at. It's like, it's not that I am afraid of the pain and pushing through. It's the fact that it's become dysfunctional in the aim of the session. Like the aim of the session is to get off the line really well and keep top hand pressure down, but I can't even do that. So am I willing to carry on pushing through, look at the data at the end of the session and go, wow, you're slow. And then have that whole mental game in my head going, am I shit? Where actually your elbow's sore and you can't actually function. So yeah, rather not go down that path, rather just go, it's sore. I'm going to go and do 4K float, 4K easy float, and focus on something that maybe I can do.
Right. Well, and I think, that's an important point, I guess, where you're saying, okay, if the pain is leading to dysfunction, and then maybe that starts to have negative implications for your confidence, then obviously not necessarily a good thing. So,
I guess it's pain to dysfunction to a belief that you're not competent.
Right. Would you say that your ability to distinguish different types of pain or the implications of pain for your functional movements, did that become better as your career progressed? You mentioned earlier sort of like a distinction, I think that was related to earlier in your career versus later. Did that ability to monitor your pain and its meaning or its possible implications change over the course of your career?
I became much more educated, much more aware of doing the experiment. I just became a better experimenter, and distinguishing when it was, the knowledge, as I say, the relationship definitely became better throughout the career. It's like when I stopped doing pushing exercises, literally, because the traditions of sports also comes into play, where bench press is such a traditional kayaker's exercise, just being able to bench press,
Yeah.
and lots of weight. My impression, in my head, bench press, you have to be able to do bench press if you want to be a good kayaker, because that's what everyone does. And now you can't do it. Shit. How are you going to build your chest? Well, let's ask the S&C coach, how can you build your chest without doing pushing exercises? Turns out there are things you can do. You can do cable flies. You can do dumbbell pullover. There are other ways.
Yeah.
And then, like, we were training with the British team, and it turns out one of the blokes, he hadn't done bench press for like 8 years because his shoulder just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So it's also that like relationship and knowledge about what is needed in your sport. Because if you believe that this is so necessary, you're going, that competency level's just going further and further down the tubes.
Yeah. Well, and earlier you talked about, just modifying either training or your program, I guess, to kind of fit your body, or in this case, with your injury that you had to your elbow, the need to, engage in alternative types of strengthening. And would you say it's important for athletes to get information or education about the nature of their injury?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Why?
Like knowing mechanically what's going on inside that joint every time that you put pressure on it and push. This is what it's doing. Like your socket is here, and every time your bone goes in there and there's a big bone spur on here, it's grabbing your cartilage and ripping it. Like, if that's not motivation to manage it, then I don't know what is, because that's just a horrible concept, right?
Right. So understanding the concept of what's actually happening as you're kind of putting maybe strain or pressure on that injured site was important in helping you actually manage the injury, or to kind of be proactive in your
For my
treatment.
injury, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Maybe knowing those things for other injuries might be seen as a barrier for people. Maybe it increases sensitivity to that perception of the injury that is unnecessary, where a physician might say, look, that tendon needs to be worked. It needs to be worked. You need to actually explore new areas of pain. But for me, my injury, it was like, well, mate, you don't, in terms of grafting new cartilage, no one's found a good way yet. And that is all you've got. So
Right.
try and preserve it, mate, so yeah.
Yeah, I've got a few more questions, Steve. I appreciate your insights, and it's a real pleasure chatting with you.
No.
Maybe you can speak a little bit about the value or relevance of clear communication between the athlete and the treatment provider, whether it's the physiotherapist or maybe a surgeon, sport medicine doctor. Maybe you can elaborate on the communication and its relevance to one's recovery.
Sure. I think that there's obviously the factual information things that you communicate about, but certainly working through injuries with providers that, it's not dissimilar to working through ways to be better with your physiologist. And, like we talked about Pete earlier, and the reason why Pete was an amazing physiologist was because he was a friend as well, So the communication with the person that's helping you, a big impact of that is what's your relationship with them. Of course, they're going to tell you what they know, right? they're going to research it and say, this is what the bone's doing, this is what the tendon's doing, this is what you need to do to improve, but the genuine care for that person and consideration for what they're trying to do, I guess is something that's so important in that communication. So, for example, like Pete, like I guess service providers like Pete, like you get the sense that they genuinely understand what you're doing holistically with your life, right? Like you are basically putting everything else on hold or doing it really slowly, whether it's part-time uni or like, you're giving your whole day to this.
Yeah.
And now you're broken. That sense of understanding and empathy for that via your relationship being a friendship too is so powerful in terms of the way that it's communicated.
Right.
So maybe that's gone off track a bit and a bit philosophical, but communication wise, sure. Like communication about the injury and the clarity of what we're dealing with, sure, that's one thing, but who it's coming from and the understanding they have for not just what this means to your performance, but what it actually means to your whole choice to be doing this every day, you know?
Yeah. So even, in the role of someone such as a physiologist who may be giving you like very detailed, obviously physiological knowledge, it sounds like there's still something important or valuable about them doing it in a way where they're not just maybe giving you some factual information, but in a way that demonstrates that they genuinely understand and care about what you're doing, how it fits into your life, sort of in relation to your goals, maybe. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just making sure I'm trying to summarize.
That's a great way of summarizing it. That's so important, the way that that's communicated. This is the plan, mate. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get you up to speed real quick. You I don't know. Perhaps that something that comes out of this research, for example, is, if you're trying to use the injury and acknowledge the power of injury, is it helpful if your service providers that are helping you through that injury are also of that same attitude?
Sure.
So they're also coming and going like, cool. Like by the time you come out of this, your hips and glutes are going to be so strong, mate. Your rotation in your boat, in your kayak, you're going to be super strong down there. Sure, we've got maybe 4 weeks to add some strength in your upper body, which is more than enough. But I reckon you're going to come back. You're going to come back. You feel refreshed. I don't know. Something along those lines.
Right. So it's not just. I think it sounds like you're also kind of alluding to this idea that it's not just the content of the information, but how that information is delivered. And it almost sort of the way you're describing it sounds like there's a coach-like element or coach-esque element to how that information is delivered, and maybe a sort of a motivating or a way that shows again that they care about, they genuinely want you to use this information in a helpful way that you can integrate, that helps you, compete and do the skills that you want to be able to do.
Yeah. What can you do?
Yeah.
Like what can you do rather than what are you not able to do because of your injury? It's like, it's a different question.
Yeah.
So if they understand that, then that's going to be pretty cool.
Right. Just a couple other questions for you. I'm wondering, how do you know, like say after maybe you can tell us, I don't actually know what the surgery was that you had on your elbow. What was it?
So it ended up being basically a tidy up of the elbow joint. And they had an idea via the scans of what was going on in there, but they weren't 100% sure of what they were going to do. But ultimately, they got in there and basically said that without doing a cartilage graft, which is like open wound surgery, like pretty hectic stuff, there's nothing that we can actually do once we get in here. So they tidied it up and got rid of all the calcified, I don't even, maybe that's the wrong word, but it looks like, they showed me the video of it afterwards, and it's like furry, like scar tissue and stuff like that. So they ended up tidying it up, but it was certainly just really creaky and a little bit painful for like a couple of months afterwards.
Right. So how did you know after those couple months of pain, or how did you know that you were ready to start resuming certain activities, or maybe to compete? Because you mentioned, I think what was it? Was it the national championships?
Yeah.
You won the national championships. How did you know that you were ready to compete? What was the basis for that decision?
Just pain.
Pain. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So a lack of pain, I'm assuming, or the absence of pain through certain movements.
Yeah. I think maybe I was going to compete anyway, but I didn't realize I was going to be able to compete at that level. Like, so.
Yeah. Is there, I guess, in terms of decisions to return to competition after an injury, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to your surgery on your elbow, but would you say, is it strictly a physical, are there physical criteria that have to be met, strictly physical criteria, or are there also psychological elements to when an athlete should resume competitive activity, or when they can resume?
Perhaps just this, I mean, for me, it just had a lot to do with the mental state that I was in going into that surgery, for example. So I was very happy, very content, loved everything about it. Had the surgery, ready to go back mentally, straight away. Whereas maybe if I'd gone into it and I was a little bit burnt out and I was just, I need a break, I'm this, I'm that, there might have been a sense of like, difficulty getting back into it. But for me at the time, like the people around me at the institute, that was, I guess, for me, like enough of a community to feel supported going into it. Getting back into it, which has changed, my perception of what community really is. Having joined the Surf Life Saving Club in 2015, which is obviously 2 and a bit years into the Rio cycle, but I think mentally, it depends on how you go into the injury. Physically, it's just a pain measurement. But perhaps another element to it is socially, I just, felt like we talked about support earlier, and I felt like really supported to go back into it.
Yeah. And so that support facilitated your state of mind, that you were kind of ready to get back and compete. And
it's similar to kind of after Rio, I took 2017 off and really got involved down at the Surf Life Saving Club, and being part of that club where you've got, there's 2,200 members at that club, and they come from all sorts of different walks. And that is one of the most, it's been one of the most supported I've felt by a community unconditionally. Whereas, you know, when you're in a sporting system and you're tiered as an athlete, like, and this is how much funding you get for this. And it's almost like, it's not a genuine community of support, you know. But in 2017, coming back into the frame for the 2018 season after having the year off, you know, I felt really motivated and supported by my community.
Right. So it's interesting because it sounds like, you know, when that support is sort of contingent on performance, or you mentioned like funding is tiered, that, you know, I guess that's different when you use the term unconditional. So I suppose if the sort of support is irrespective of your performance or outcomes, that kind of thing, then maybe it contributes to a different feeling. My last question for you, Steve, is if you were to share one piece of advice for injured athletes, what would it be?
I think to summarize that question, it's what we've been talking about in terms of making that choice from as quick as you can of which way you want to go.
Yeah.
You know, which way you're going to go, because you've got, it's kind of two choices really. Do you crash and burn, or do you use it and acknowledge the power, the power of pain, the power of injury, the power of isolation, and the power of autonomy. I mean, you know, that self-determination, where I believe that often your self-determination, your autonomy takes a little bit of a hit when you get institutionalized, you know. So really fill that cup back up, you know, go and do the things that you want to do, go and do the things, and go reintroduce yourself and re-engage with communities or groups of people that you used to train with, you know, like you used to paddle with that guy that when you were young, that, you know, you chose this Olympic path and he chose just ocean paddling. Hey mate, how you going? Do you want to go and train once a week together? You know, return to that thing that got you fired up about the sport. But yeah, certainly got to make that decision first, before you embark on anything really.
Yeah. So that decision, does it then give you clarity to pursue the path that you choose, you know, once you've made a decision which way to go? Like, my impression is that you're someone who pursues things with a lot of determination. That kind of, once you make that choice to sort of really sort of put in your full effort, I guess, towards it.
Yes, the clarity. That's a good word. What you just used there is, you know, clarity is underrated. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you've got a clear way to go, like, and a clear plan, it's a hell of a lot easier to be determined. You know, expecting yourself to be determined in a hazy environment, when you're unsure, I mean, gee, there can't be anything more debilitating for your determination and your motivation than that, you know. So 100%, like, making a decision, making a choice breeds clarity. It breeds clarity in establishing why it's worth moving on and going for it, you know. Yeah. And then dealing with the how, you know. So yeah, clarity is a great way of describing the outcome of making an early decision.
Yeah. Well, I think those are great thoughts and statements to finish our discussion, Steve. And again, I just really want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time. And I know that, you know, an athlete who watches our discussion or listens to it, I'm sure can only benefit. You know, not only have you accomplished a great deal, but it's just obvious through our conversation that you're analytical and thoughtful about what you do. And to me, that's something that I also would take away if I were kind of listening to it. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
No worries, Liz. No, I enjoy talking about this stuff. It's pretty cool.